Just a quick glance ahead at what you're going to be doing with these formative and summative scores at the end of a course. So again, ninth grade elective teachers, when you wrap up a course at the end of semester, you'll be doing this in January. Everybody else will be doing this in June for our year-long courses. So this doesn't look exactly like Infinite Campus, but you get the idea, and it's a nice quick screenshot where you can see formative and summative scores for each of the 4 criteria. So, and you can see down below here is where the teacher came up with the final score, the summative score for each of the 4 criteria. So let's just look quickly at criterion A. You've got a 6, an 8, and a 4 in formative scores and a 3 on the summative. So we can kind of see a little bit up and down, but mostly a downward trend for this student. The summative score was a 3, but based on the stronger, and there's only one summative data point for this course at this point. This is why we want to have at least 2 data points of summative assessment for each criteria by the end of the year. But when we only have one summative, we're going to lean more heavily on what patterns we see with our formatives. And the formative scores show us that the student was achieving at a higher level earlier in the year and then started to trend downward. The teacher thought these 2 grades are in the same band, the 3-4 band, that the strength of their formative scores showed that they did have some consistently hot, like good quality work, and that this one data point confirms that they're in that band, but the formatives help us push them to that higher level of the band. So you can see that some of this trend scoring is an art, not a science. You're not adding them up and coming up with a average number. You're really looking at the quality of the student work on the different assessment tasks. I have had this happen too, where I look at this formative score of an 8 and I'm like, that was not a good assessment task. Everybody got an 8 on it. I kind of just gave them points to keep them invested, but it's not quality data. So we also can bring that to our thinking about these trends. If you realized early in the year you were scoring kids too high, too generously, and that your scores actually got more accurate toward the end of the year, just factor that in as you're looking at assigning this final score. Here we see a clear trend from a 4 on a formative to a 5 on a summative. The summative score is the 5. So the teacher determined that's where they grew to over the course of the year. Here we can see the danger of under assessing one of the criterion. We have no formatives and only one summative score. So we're going to use that summative score as our single data point, but it's not very good data about student learning if we've only got a single point, especially if they didn't get any practice and formative feedback leading up to that summative. And then again, we have a formative and a summative. Here we see a trend down by a point. And again, we go with that, just like we did with criterion B, we go with that summative score, both in the band, same band, the 5-6 band. And so those are your final scores then for criterion A, B, C, and D. And what we would then do is then there is a grading boundaries chart, and we've got a spreadsheet that will calculate this for you. When you put in these 4 scores on the spreadsheet, it will automatically spit out the overall course grade for the student because we're using that grading boundaries chart. Few quick reminders: there's no weighted categories in our grade book. So 80%, 20%, like you may be able to find that somewhere in the Infinite Campus grade book, but it's not being applied to our scores. We do consider summative score first, and then we look at the formative scores as supplemental data. Point 2, we can find evidence of learning anywhere we can find it. So if students have limited scores on formal assessment tasks, either formative or summative, you can consider other evidence as you determine the best fit score. Class discussions, one-on-one conversations, informal formative assessments, things you just watched them do in class and gave them feedback on. If you know that a student knows the material and they had a rough patch and didn't turn in their formatives for something, but you saw them engaged in class, you can use that observational data to support their scoring trend. And again, remember, we don't average scores. We're determining the best fit for each criterion. So that's just a quick snapshot of, again, end of course. Here is what those formative and summative scores are going to mean for students and for you as you are doing your IB scoring and coming up with their final overall IB grade.